Today we're going to talk about the 2006 remake of The Wicker Man compared to the 1973 original and best. This was directed by Neil Butte, who wrote it based upon the screenplay from the original by Anthony Schafer, which was of course itself based upon the novel Ritual by David Pinner. That's actually credited in this film. They did one thing better. Do you know what else they did better? They got Nicolas freaking Cage, as well as Ellen Burstyn, Kate Behan and Lily Sobieski, who sadly isn't acting anymore, but she's enjoying an art career, so I respect that. It's her choice, it's her life. If that's what she wants to do and she's fulfilled, I will not argue, as much as I'd like to see her in more. So first things first, there are two scenes that everyone thinks about with this film. Let's get those out of the way. The one that probably a third of you might be thinking of first, if you're being completely honest, you can put in the comments whatever you want, but I know. But the one that people think of less is the doll scene in the graveyard.
How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned?
I don't know!
It's unhinged Nicolas Cage, and that's one thing we love to see. Now the other one, I didn't actually see in this because I stupidly put on the theatrical cut. So the scene, the one that everyone is thinking of, including the ones who thought about, the other one first, everyone knows what I mean by the scene now. But it wasn't in my version. I missed it. I feel cheated. So because of that, I'm probably not going to put it in this. I may not. Is this a clever ploy to try and gain engagement? You'll find out. But let's talk about the film. So, first things first, yes, there's a lot of similarities. I read somewhere I think 80% of the material is directly lifted, even if it's kind of remixed. Some lines are coming from different characters, they're in different scenes, they're in entirely different settings, but most of the material is kept. I'm not sure that was the best idea, especially if you're keeping it but moving it around. If you're going to keep it in the right way. I respect the idea. I will give this to it. It is clearly a love of the original that created this. I also think a love of Kubrick. There's a lot of scenes that made me feel that there's a very Kubrick eye behind this, although some of that weirdness existed in the 1973 version of The Wicker Man, so might be somewhere in the middle of those. But if you're going to have a remake of something that's almost exactly the same, why bother? Or if you're going to completely change it but make it worse, why bother? This does something sort of in the middle, and this is why I think it's been much maligned, apart from those two scenes. Now, I do like Angelo Badalamenti. I will say that up front now. But one of the things I really appreciated of the original was the fact that it was technically a weird musical. I think I called it a neo-pagan horror musical last week. But none of that's here. We don't have Paul Giovanni and Magnet, coming out with wonderful songs. But that's, again, part of the change. Like, from the start, it is definitely saying, we know the original exists, we accept that, this is our variant. I don't know if this hews any closer to the original novel, I've not read it. But it is different from 1973. For better or worse. But it does set up the heroic figure in Edward Malus. Not Edward Woodward, because that's Willow's surname. I like how they did that. They gave that homage, that respect to Sergeant Howie's actor. And I do really love that. The fact that they are respecting what came before. I will always give that. But like I say, Edward Malus is, a cop. He attempts this rescue. It shows his good nature. As we learn later, it's all set up. I'll get to that, because I'm not going to jump too far ahead. But this relationship with Willow, she calls him and says, my daughter Rowan, instead of someone else. So Willow's kind of an amalgam of herself and Mae Morrison, I think you could argue. But like I say, Willow, calls and it's like, yeah, I need you to come and investigate this. And, because he's been traumatized by the accident, the truck ramming into the car, as far as he's aware, anyway, the accident. But whilst he's off for that trauma, he's like, well, I'll go. I've seen people on IMDb, I know I shouldn't, but I've seen people in trivia on IMDb or Goose kind of saying like, oh, he wouldn't be assigned this case. It's like, I don't think he was assigned a case. I think this was the thing, like, I'm going to investigate it. It's not officially a case yet. I might be misremembering the start of the film, but that's what I got from it. So it's, it is different. So, he's called out over there. There's obviously, little nice nods in the fact there's a seaplane that helps sort of take them there, and that's how food and stuff gets delivered into Downham, because it's not produce, it's bees. The bees, you might say. And I do respect the fact that, like I say, it does set itself out as different. They could have had Nick Cage do a terrible Scottish accent or Edward Woodward impression, but they don't. They let him be Nicolas Cage, and I respect that entirely. But like I say, this island is known for its honey, its mead. Bees are the thing. And, the harvests sometimes fail, like in the original. But with the bees, I've written it in my notes as Chekhov's bee allergy. Because the whole thing, the bee comes down, he smashes it like I'm allergic. People have actually pointed out, by the way, those kind of cups, you wouldn't have smashed the bee. Unless it was like on the rim, that thick rim. There's normally like a dip cut out in the bottom. So the bee probably survived. Just so it's not real anyway. No bees would have been harmed. The AHA's all over that these days. But bees are such a core part of this film. And I do like it. I like the level of detail. We have honeycomb designs all over the place to replicate that idea of a hive. We have Sister Summer's Isle. I don't like the extra S in there. I will say that now. But we have Sister Summer's Isle as the queen bee, if you will. She is the top. The men that exist are subservient, just drones, literally just to do a task and to procreate. That's it. Men are not a vital part. They're a vital part. They do say they're important to us, but they're not seen on a level. So we do have this, similar idea to a bee colony, and I do like that. I do appreciate that. But they're of course known, like I said, for honey and mead, that kind of thing. There's a great parallel with the produce line that Howie says about, the store-bought. I thought you made this here. Why is it store-bought? I do like, again, these things that have that parallel, that comparison to the original. And they're cagey about May Day. There's this whole semantic issue, which again was in the original with Miss Rose. But we have this semantic thing about the day of tomorrow or something like that. It's like, oh, you mean the day after tomorrow? It's like, oh, is that a weird way of saying it? So what's happening tomorrow then? Nothing, I told you. There's a lot of this kind of caginess, if you'll pardon the pun. Nick Cage. Terrible, I know, but there's a lot of caginess about this 73 thing. And we have, again, the school teacher being very precise and clipped with the language. Of course, outside the school is in Maypole, as a callback to why I have the thing that doesn't show up well on green screen, so I'm not going to lift it again. But we have, instead of the ground was used for worship, all that kind of stuff, we have she'll burn, misheard, and then it's like she burned. There's all this wonderful setup. Whilst I'm not saying this film is great, I'm not suddenly coming out in massive defence of this film. I was toying with the idea of doing it as an in defence of, because the first one was why I love, so now this could be in defence of, but I don't think it's quite got that merit. There's stuff I like about this, but it's still not great, and I can't actually defend it that way. But if I was, this would be part of what I would defend. It's that setup that was well done in the original as well. A lot of the setup was there, if you're paying attention. How they're leading him, how they're testing him. Similar things here. How, there's things that are misheard or misspoke. One of the things I didn't like, and again, because I watched the wrong version, the theatrical cut, instead of the better version, I guess you could argue, I can't remember if in that version all these weird flashbacks where he's starting to piece it together subconsciously, like dream sequences, whatever you want to call them, it kind of feels forced in a way, like it's kind of memory dives, whatever. The mystery would be helped. Maybe having them at the end, and maybe that's what the other cut does. I didn't feel like I hadn't seen them before, but they felt too familiar. That's, I think, what I'm trying to say, to just be for this. So I really think that could have been tacked on as a reveal towards the end, like, oh, you see, that person was there, this is how you were being led, it was all a deception, the bodies were never found, I wonder why, all this kind of stuff. I do think that would have really helped keep it mysterious, keep it interesting. You're being force-fed little nuggets to go, I see, this is why this is happening, look, keep watching. I think it does the opposite. It means that you can turn off your brain like, okay, yeah, it's all been a setup, just let me see the ending then. But on the notes of dreams and stuff, I did think the dream fake out of him rescuing what he thought was Rowan, and oh, it's fine, and then it's like, oh, it's not real, I've actually got the body, and then wakes up properly. Dream fake outs, I hate in general. I think they lack impact because it's, you're just getting a shock. Earned scares, earned jumps, and things like that are a very different beast. Those aren't earned. And here it felt very forced, and I did not like it. Now, around this sort of point in the film, you know, like we're getting towards the end, and he meets Francis Conroy's character as Dr. Moss. And I love Francis Conroy in pretty much everything. I had to double check because there was a period of time, there was an injury she had to her eye. I'm not going to go into detail, you can look it up yourself. But until American Horror Story, where it was written in as a plot point, she often used a sort of cover like a contact lens. And it's seamless. You know, you could watch films before the accident and after, until, you know, she started just being okay with it and having it out a lot more, should we say. But you could watch films and you wouldn't necessarily know. Like, there's possibly a bit more of a sheen, but it's not super obvious. And I had to double check the dates, because like, is this before or after? Because this was still during being covered up. But I loved her in this, you know, and again, there's accuracy, I guess, being pushed. It's one of the things that's definitely more prominent in this. Whilst it was Miss Rose who was being very precise, and I guess Lord Summerall, a lot of people are being very precise with how they're doing things and how they're talking about things. It's very much like, you can see that he's being led, even without these flashbacks, whatever you want to call them. But this process that they're doing with him, like I said with, you know, with Howie in that video and earlier in this, he was tested through sins, you know, like lust and wrath, that kind of thing. But here it's almost like they're testing his conviction. They're constantly pushing him. Like, will he carry on if we do this? Will he carry on if we do this? It is this kind of thing of constantly pushing, so that at the end of it, he's so invested that he has to rescue Rowan. There is no other choice. They're leading him down that road. And I love that idea. Again, it's part of what I appreciate in this. It was less hard to watch than I remembered it being, let's put it that way. But with this adaptation, the scene that got me to watch the original, they had to put it in. I think a lot of people responded to that scene. Neil of you probably responded to that scene, let's be honest. But here it was so flat. And I don't know if it's the dynamics of like the playful music in the original that makes it extra creepy. Whereas here it was like, you know, that typical thrillery kind of soundtrack. And again, respect for Angelo Badalamenti, that's what he was told to do. So he did his job well, I'm sure. But that scene just fell flat to me because it just didn't hit the same way. There was less of that creep factor. And it's not because I was expecting it or anything like that. It still mildly creeped me out when I watched it this time, but it was less so. It was a joyful kind of like, oh, I know it's coming, oh, it's still a bit weird. Here it was just fell flat and was basically terrible. So as we near the end of the film, we do have the moment where, again, I think this was an improvement. And I don't know if it's because, you know, Scots people love to fight, so I don't know. But he brings out his gun, you know, it's like, oh no, you can't take me, I'm going to take you all down, blah, blah, blah. Finds out the gun obviously doesn't work, it's not loaded. But he still tries to physically fight back. Howie just gave in. And I understood it. You know, it's like, well, I'm never going to win. The odds are so stacked against me, I may as well just accept this is my fate. But in not even trying to fight back, I don't know, something lacked. And like I said, I'm saying this with absolute love for the original, remember? I didn't even mention this last week, it just made me think of it this time. I do respect the fact that Nick Cage, Edward Mayless, tried to fight back. Again, he'd have looked at it and gone, there is no way. But if I can at least take some of them down with me, or give me that small fighting chance, you never know. I might just hit the right person and be able to bomb through. And of course, this is after he punches out 3 women at least, I think. Some while dressed as a bear. It's amazing. It's very Nick Cage. But this fighting back, I do think was a massive improvement. And of course, you know, yeah, it ends pretty much the same way. He goes into the Wicker Man. And in the better version, I would still argue, compared to the one that I stupidly watched, the film ends when he's in the Wicker Man and the head falls. And when you watch it in this cut, it looks like a really good ending point. You can just fade to black, you know, after like a little bit of the burning, just fade to black, that's it, credit. Brilliant. I love that idea of an ending. But instead, in this other version, we have a 6 months later scene. And we have Willow and, do you know what? I can't even remember Lily Sobieski's character's name. She's just Lily to me. But we have them at the bar with, I think it's Jason Ritter. My brain's saying Jason Ritter and James Franco. Let's not talk about that too much. But yeah, so we have them in a bar, and there was a moment early in the film that I didn't mention at the time because I wanted to bring it here. When her and Nick Cage are talking, she says, when you go, take me with you. And then later in this scene, at the end of this scene, that's what she says, in that different way. And I put on my notes, like, was that her testing it out? Was this Is it almost like, I'm not saying that this is what the Amish do, but of course, but this is kind of almost like the Rumspringa, I hope I've said that right, where they go out into the world to see what it's like for, I think, a year, when they're about 18, and then go back. Again, I've not really looked into the Rumspringa properly, so some of that might be factually inaccurate. Feel free to correct below. I'm happy for that to be corrected. But it's almost like she's practicing that before she's sent out into the world, like Willow does for Edward, or did for Edward in the past. It's almost like, it's that getting it practiced, because she wouldn't normally be able to practice. Like, the drones, if you will, are probably not great fodder. So actually a real person from there was her getting some practice in. I don't know. This might be just me drawing some conjecture from it. But if that's the case, I think, again, it shows that there's some great intentions here. But great intentions do not a great film make. Whilst I've said some good points about this, I think I've said a lot of negative as well. There's a lot that could be done better, should have been done better, I would say. But I didn't hate it as much as I thought I would or remembered. Is that because it's Nick Cage insanity? Is it because there's similarities to the original? Is it because there's elements of Kubrick? I mean, there's twins all over the place here, so yeah, Kubrick and twins. But I don't know. There's a lot more to love here than I think people give it credit for, and it's more than just 2 scenes. And you know what? You've sat through all this. You've sat through, again, probably longer than I intended to, maybe 15 minutes, maybe longer. So, as a little treat, at the end of this video, after I've said thank you very much for watching, and as always, until next time, take care, you get the scene.
Say the line, Bart!
What is that? What is it? Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah!